Hey everyone, Peter Zeihan coming to you from Colorado. Today I want to talk about the wheat situation in Ukraine and Russia. Now, for the last several weeks, UN staff and diplomatic personnel from Turkey and Pacific have been working to broker a deal that would allow Ukrainian wheat to leave Ukrainian ports under Ukrainian control and get to the wider world. There's a lot of moving pieces here. For one, the Ukrainians have mined their own ports to inhibit the Russians' ability to launch amphibious assaults, so they have to guide the vessels through. And then, of course, the Russians are assaulting everything that moves and a lot of things that are not, so you have to get the Russians to agree to stop their assaults on the ports. Now, right now, the Ukrainians have about 18 million metric tons stored up in their silos at or adjacent to their ports. That's a lot that needs to move. That is in excess of half of a normal harvest for the country. On Monday, August 1, we got our first ship, the Razoni, to dock, to load up, and to leave for Lebanon. It's carrying 26,000 metric tons. So we need 700 more ships of this size if we're going to get that grain out. Unfortunately, the Ukrainian harvest starts in less than 45 days. So you're talking about needing to get a dozen or so vessels in there every single day. So far, we've had one. I don't have a lot of hope for this. And then the real problem, of course, is the harvest. Two problems. Right now, the Ukrainians have nowhere to put it. Their silos are full from last year's harvest. They weren't able to export because the war started back in February. And second, even if the farmers were able to work their fields and not be molested by Russian troops, and remember, we've already had mass evacuations from eastern and southern Ukraine, the problem remains is that they can't get fuel into the country. So you're talking about needing to harvest industrial levels of wheat without industrial equipment, and that's just not possible. So likely end result here is that this is the last year that Ukraine participates in international grain markets. They simply don't have the capacity to get stuff up at a scale. In fact, the only place that they might be able to ship stuff is by rail, and at most, with significant upgrades that have not yet been done, they can probably only ship about 1/5 of their normal produce out that way. The rail lines are just not designed for that kind of bulk cargo, and a lot of them have to transit a little territory called Transnistria, which is under Russian control. You remove the world's fourth largest wheat exporter from the market, and you're going to look at cascading problems, not just with food prices and malnutrition, but civil conflict and breakdown, most notably in the Middle East. The last time we had a doubling of global wheat prices, we saw the Arab Spring back in 2011. What we're dealing with is an order of magnitude more complicated and deeper rooted. And to think that we're only going to have a doubling of prices is ridiculously optimistic. Now, in the United States, this isn't necessarily a disaster. You double the price of wheat, you actually only increase the cost of a loaf of bread by 25 cents. We don't subsidize food processing like, say, Egypt does. So here, it's a little uncomfortable. It'll probably be noticed, but it's not going to be a deal killer. Other parts of the world, not so much. All right, that's it from me. Until next time.
Hey everybody, Peter Zeihan here, coming to you from my old stomping grounds, Austin, Texas. To my Austin friends, that is correct. I did not tell you that I was coming here, and I have had some margaritas. However, I'm only here for 19 hours, so don't get crazy. I'll still see you in a couple weeks when I'm back. Anywho, the big news of October 5 is that OPEC has announced it is planning on reducing output by 2 million barrels a day, despite the fact that there's a war raging in a major energy producer, and energy prices writ large are really high, and global inflation is high. Now, some people are, of course, well, I shouldn't say some people, a lot of people are, of course, latching this onto what their favorite drum is to beat at the moment. Some people on Twitter have said that, of course, they're doing this to stick it to, quote, my boy Biden. And, my boy Biden? Ew. No. Far more important is that OPEC is nowhere near their production quota. In fact, as recently as August, they were about 2.8 million barrels a day below it. So if they cut their quota by 2 million barrels a day, that actually means they might increase output. So, number one, let's wait to see what happens here. The problem here is that if you are outside of the Persian Gulf, OPEC members, so Kuwait, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia, everyone else has just been in this investment bomb for over a decade. In fact, since 2014, total investment to all oil and all natural gas globally, government, state company, private companies, doesn't matter, the total is down by about 2/3. And the non-Gulf OPEC countries are no exception. Places like Gabon and Nigeria and Venezuela are just borderline incompetent when it comes to maintaining their own energy infrastructure anyway. So they're completely dependent on internal investment, and yet they think they have checks that they need to write, so they don't provide the investors with particularly great terms. And so if you're those investors and cash is limited, you try to put your money elsewhere where it's going to be more productive with a more reliable partner. And that manifests as lower production in a lot of OPEC states to the tune of apparently 2.8 million barrels per day. Now, in the last few weeks, about a fresh million has come online, mostly from Libya and Nigeria, because a certain confluence of events have allowed them to increase output in the short term. But don't expect that to drop. Both of them are very close to record low outputs at the moment, and they'll probably be back within a few months. This is kind of how it shakes out with these folks. Anyway, bottom line is, before you ascribe any sort of motivation to OPEC, the favorite one being that they're trying to stick it to Biden because Biden is green and hasn't been exactly kind to the Saudis. There might be something to that, but we're not there yet. Don't ever, in this line of work, listen to what people say. Watch what they do, especially when you're talking about folks in the Middle East, where suicide bombs are often perceived as a legitimate form of political discourse. The rules are different over there, and we need to keep that in mind before we jump to any conclusions. So wait, watch. Let's see what the Saudis do over the course of the next few weeks with their actual oil exports. That'll tell us everything we need to know about what it is they're trying to actually achieve. Okay, that's it for me. Until next time.
Hey everyone, still August 2, and I got to talk about the elephant in the room. Nancy Pelosi, the Speaker of the House, Democratic leadership, is probably going to be going to Taiwan very soon. Maybe today, maybe tomorrow. That's soon. So this is super exciting. The one China policy is something that the United States developed kind of unofficially back in the 1970s, when we decided that it was really important for us to split the Chinese off from the Soviets. So Nixon went to visit Mao, and they basically hashed out a deal where China would join the American-led globalized order, and China would become a major industrial and manufacturing power as a result, have access to the American market just like all the other allies did. Game changer. But that is not now. The Cold War ended in 1992, so the strategic rationale for this sort of partnership dissolved 30 years ago. And in the 30 years since, the Chinese and the Americans have found themselves on increasingly opposite sides of pretty much every question that matters, whether it's environmental or energy or manufacturing or trade or human rights. You can really pick your poison. Which means that over the last decade, interest in the United States in the one-child policy has been waning dramatically. Under Trump, we almost got a presidential visit. He actually mooted the idea until he decided that he liked talking with Xi. But we did get all kinds of trade restrictions on Chinese exports that are still in place today under Biden. Under Biden, it started with a bunch of what seemed to be slip-ups, with Biden saying things that immediately his staff had to walk back. But then he kept saying them, and the walkbacks became a lot less focused, and we now have Biden on record saying that the Chinese attacked Taiwan, the United States is duty and treaty bound to defend it. It's not treaty bound to defend it, but that is now still state policy according to the president, who is the only one that matters on this. So will Pelosi go? That's up to her. She doesn't have to. Will the U.S. intervene if Pelosi's vessel is shot down? Absolutely, but we probably wouldn't do it in Taiwan. Unless the Chinese decide to do more than just kill Pelosi, like actually launch an invasion, the likely American retaliation isn't going to be in the Taiwan Straits. It's probably going to be in the South China Sea or even in the Indian Ocean. because the United States has a long-reach Navy and the Chinese don't. So it would be child's play for the United States to basically cut the energy line. Now, me personally, I don't think the Chinese are so stupid as to provoke that kind of fight, especially when they know they lack the military capacity to enforce their will on Taiwan anyway, even if the United States were not involved. Shooting down an American diplomatic mission would guarantee an American involvement. That's not something the Chinese can afford or would do. They're not dumb, but they are blind. Under Chairman Xi, we have seen a complete gutting of government decision-making and just the evisceration of the ability of any bureaucrat or minister to take a stance on anything without clearing with Xi first. We have complete paralysis. This isn't Russia, where there's still a half dozen people who still have Putin's ear. This is China, where Xi has literally executed the messengers so many times that he's no longer getting accurate information, and where people are abiding by cult of personality economics and politics and doing what they think their great leader wants. And if they think their great leader wants a war with Taiwan, a lot of triggers could be pulled without actually being what Xi wants to happen. So if this were up to Xi, if he was micromanaging this situation, I really doubt we'd have a conflict. But that's not necessarily where we are right now. The nationalism, the wolf warrior diplomacy, it has gotten away from Beijing and it's taken on a life of its own. And that is where the risk is now. You get some ultranationalist Chinese who's control of a ship or a missile system or a plane who decides to take the shot. And that would get ugly very quickly for China. Okay, that's it from me. Until next time.